Hello, I'm Sean Murray, and this is The Conversation, where we take an alternative look at political events and current affairs through an Irish lens. In this show, we hope to pick, probe, investigate, and uncover the stories that you want to hear. We go where mainstream won't go. This week, we will be looking at one of the conflict's most controversial incidents, a case that has not only shocked even the most seasoned human rights investigators, but exposed the extent of systemic British government collusion. But before we do, let's get a quick overview on this week's topic. On the 5th of February 1992, two Loyalist gunmen walked into Sean Graham's Bookmakers on the Lower Ormeau Road and opened fire, killing 5 Catholic civilians. The Ulster Defence Association, under the cover name of the Ulster Freedom Fighters, claimed responsibility for the attack shortly afterwards. Among the dead were locals Christy Doherty, 52, Jack Duffin, 66, James Kennedy, 15, Peter Maguire, 18, and William McManus, 54. The killings took place during an intense period of sectarian attacks against the Catholic community around the north of Ireland. The Lower Ormeau had been a hotspot for such sectarian killings throughout the conflict due to easy access for gunmen from nearby Unionist areas. Locals from the area had also been barricaded into their homes annually in order to facilitate yearly sectarian marches by Orangemen. In the aftermath of the Sean Graham's massacre, the first Orange marchers to pass the scene waved 5-fingered salutes in attempts to taunt the grieving families of those that were killed. This galvanised the community to put an end to the yearly scenes that were responsible for re-traumatising victims of Loyalist killings. Lower Ormeau Concerned Community was formed to both combat and organise resistance to the yearly siege imposed upon the community. From the outset, the RUC were seen to facilitate the Orange State by viciously attacking peaceful protesters that had been attempting to block the path of marchers. On the 5th of July 1999, 7 years after the killings at Sean Graham's, the Parades Commission, an organisation formed to adjudicate on contentious Orange marches, made a decision to reroute the sectarian march away from the Lower Ormeau Road. It was the first time the parade by Ballinafy Orange Lodge had been stopped from marching past the Ormeau Bridge in central Belfast on the Orange Men's traditional March Day, the 12th of July. 17 people were eventually arrested and questioned about the Sean Graham's massacre, with one person charged with the murders, only for it to be later withdrawn. To date, no one has ever been convicted for the killings. 2 leading Loyalists, Joe Brady and Raymond Elder, who were blamed for the killings by locals, were later executed by the IRA. And today's guests are Billy McManus and Mark Sykes. Both men have been at the forefront of the campaign at seeking truth around the 1982 Sean Graham's Bookmakers Massacre. Mark, Billy, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark, I'll first begin by asking you, just for the audience's sake, can you give me the context around what had happened on the 5th of February 1982?
As you say, it was the 5th of February 1982. It was Wednesday afternoon, and at around 2:25 in the afternoon, 2 gunmen burst into Sean Graham's Bookmakers on the Ormeau Road. The first one stood with a VZ-58 assault rifle, and the second person behind him had a Browning 9mm pistol. The person at the front with the VZ-58 opened fire on all the customers inside the shop, and I assume at that stage it hit everyone within a matter of seconds. The second gunman then came in with a Browning 9mm and fired single shots at people as they lay on the floor. I was laying closer to the door than most people, and I knew by the layout of the place that the gunman would have to pass by me again. And I put my hands up over my head, and he'd shot me under the arm. I'd already been hit 3 or 4 times at that stage, and was on the ground. I was lying beside Jack Duffin and Willie McManus, and Peter McGee, who's my 18-year-old brother-in-law, was lying along the wall beside me. I said I was on my back, so I couldn't see anybody else in the place, and the shooting probably lasted 20, 30 seconds at the most, and the gunmen then fled across the Ormeau Road into a waiting car and escaped. And within seconds then, members of the local community obviously opened the door. The first person to come into the Bookmakers was a female and she looked in and screamed and ran back out again. And then obviously pandemonium at that stage. Everybody was coming in. They were coming in out of the 2 local bars with bar towels and stuff to obviously stem the bleeding from people who were lying on the floor. And out of nowhere, a priest arrived and started to administer last rites to people who were lying on the floor. And maybe it seemed like an hour, but it was probably 10 minutes before ambulances arrived. It was a small, I think it was 28 feet by 11 feet. So it was a very small bookmakers. And the layout of the place, you couldn't get stretchers in. So they brought sheets in and put people on the sheets and took them out, brought the stretchers to the doors and put people on the stretchers and took them to hospital from there on. At that stage, I didn't know many people had been shot. I had a vague thing in my head about the amount of people who was in it. I say Peter McGee, who was my 18-year-old brother-in-law, I didn't even see him in the bookmakers. So he literally walked in front of them. And it was probably, that was on a Wednesday afternoon that happened. It was probably Saturday before I came out of intensive care and realised that 5 people were dead. My wife at the time was 7.5 months pregnant. Her brother was dead and I was in intensive care. And when she came into the hospital on the Saturday, I knew something told me that Peter McGee was dead. And then I was told that the amount of people who had died and the amount of people who were injured. And some people had been brought to the city hospital and some people had been brought to Dundonald. I think it was by chance, from what I've been told, that there was a medical type convention on in the hospital that day. So there was a lot of surgeons and a lot of medics in the place who would normally be there. And they were then taken down to the theatres and operated on people as they came in. And I always remember I was conscious the whole way up from the bookies till the city hospital. And in those days, the old ambulances had a window on the roof, and I could see, I knew I was going up the like of University Avenue. I could see the trees, and I could remember being taken into the hospital and seeing what I could describe as a doctor or surgeon who looked about 19, 20. He looked like a child, to be honest. And I thought to myself, I had no chance. Obviously, it turned out he was obviously older, but he looked quite young for his age. And really, that was the last I remember. I was obviously then put to sleep and obviously operated on. And I say it was a Saturday before then I came out of intensive care and realised what had happened.
And Billy, just moving to yourself, you found out very quickly that a member of your own family was killed.
Yeah, I was working about 100 yards away, and my supervisor at the time he had come into me and he says, Billy, something terrible's happened at the bookies. I went to the front of the shop and looked up and I could see something was happening, so can't remember running up the road, but about an hour before that I was sitting at the front of the shop and my father had walked by and I shouted over him and he waved at me. And I knew he was either going to be in the bookies or in the bar. And I just knew he was in the bookies. I knew he was there. So I sprinted up the road. There was a couple of people outside and I could hear, as Mark says, I could hear some woman screaming. She was being comforted by somebody. And then when I run up to Sean Graham's bookies, the first person I seen was my uncle, my daddy's brother. He was sitting outside and I run to him. He was holding his stomach. And you knew, I didn't know, well, you knew he was something wrong with him. And he was trying to talk to me, and there was a girl called Susie Robson at the time, she was with him. She never left him the whole time he was outside. And he says, get in, see your daddy, get in, see your daddy. I went into Sean Graham's for the first couple of 3 seconds. What I know now, I think I seen wee James Kennedy, definitely seen Paul Kennedy, and Joe McNally. But when I turned around to where my father would have been, and Jack and Peter and Mark would have been lying, somebody grabbed me and pushed me out the door and says, you don't want to go in there, don't want to go in there. I said, my father's in there. I don't know who it was, this day I don't know who it was. But then Susie, who was with my uncle, he says, Billy, he's been shot, my Uncle John's been shot. And I bent down on my knees, and he was holding his stomach, and the blood was dripping through us, and he goes, "Go on and get your dad, go on and get your dad." But then, there was no ambulances there when I got there. But when I stood up, the first ambulance had pulled up, and I run to the guy in the passenger seat, and I said, "My uncle's been shot." And he run to him, and then by that time, the police had just pulled in. One went in, and one was at the front door. And he wouldn't let me in. And I says, "Let me in, the bookies, my daddy's in there." He says, "No, you don't want to go in there, you're not going in." And then it just looked like everybody just came at once. You could hear the fire and the alarms coming, they all pulled up at once. So I stayed with my uncle as long as I could. My cousin had got took out by one of the police officers. So he was shot in the leg, and I went to him and I says, "Is my daddy okay? What about my daddy?" God help the wee lad, he didn't know where he was. He just picked himself off the floor where his friend was laying. And then I was standing outside, my Uncle Jim, the one paramedic went into Sean Graham's bookies, so the other paramedic had asked us to help him. So it was me, Susie Robinson, and a guy called Tom Breen. We had lifted my uncle onto the thing, and he could see all the blood that was left behind. And then I had just turned around, and which had been caught on television. Brian McCartney came down the steps at the time, and I said to him, "Brian, what about my daddy?" And he just says, "They're all dead." And he told me he's dead. And I lost it for a wee bit. And then I seen my uncle getting taken away, so I followed him. Like, I helped him into the ambulance, and then I went back around to the front, and that's where you see on TV. It was just, as Mark says, they couldn't get the stretchers in. They were pulling all the stretchers up. Mark was lifted out, because I knew Mark well, and I knew it was him. I stayed at the front of the crowd. I told the policeman, "Listen, my father's in there, I need to get in." So I was a wee bit in front of everybody. But I didn't realise there was a camera crew or none behind me, didn't know who was behind me. But he came out, Mark came out, but he was laying on his side where he was shot. You could see he was down like that. And then Mr. Dornan got it. I didn't know him at the time. He was taken out. Mark Hazard, they took him out on like a chair. He was shot in the legs. And then the one that I have a really hard time at is wee James Kenny getting took out.
He was only 18, is that right?
15.
15, James Kenny was.
They had him, as Mark says, on a blanket. I thought it was red. It was red. It was red with blood. And they set him on it, and I could hear him gasping for air. I looked right in his eyes, and they took him away. And then it went quiet for a couple of minutes, and then I realised the ones that's left are all dead. And then I heard a big scream behind me. My sister had walked right into it from work, didn't know anything, and somebody had told her about my daddy. And then I helped her get into a car. Somebody took her home. And then I was standing outside the bookies, and they pushed us all back. And then I realised that he wasn't coming out. So I went down to the house and met my mother and told her that by then we found out about there was 5 dead, and I knew wee Peter was one of them because Brian had told me. I said, "Brian," then he was telling all the names. Brian McCartney knew everybody who was there. The only one we didn't know about at the time was wee James, so he was taken away in the ambulance. And then they got there up in the door, and it was the policeman saying, "We need somebody to go to the morgue to identify your daddy." And so I had to go up and identify him.
And just for the audience's sake, Ormeau Road, the Lower Ormeau, has suffered a vicious campaign by Loyalist paramilitaries over the years. I was at a recent commemoration for the massacre last February. And what was the number, Billy, of people there was?
Well, some saying it's 56 and some saying it's 65 and some people are saying it's in the 70s. But it was the original murder mill during the late 60s and 80s and the late 70s. We think it's well into its 50s that were murdered during the conflict.
And you're just talking a small number of streets here, and which is just outside the city centre, actually.
Yeah, it actually comes from the railway bridge there at UTV till the Ormeau Bridge, and it probably incorporates maybe 12, 13 streets, and say 50, 56, 57 is the figures that obviously people talk about being murdered in that small geographical area. Everybody related to somebody who lives in the area. everybody who had been murdered known to somebody in the area. So say it's a small area, just outside the city centre. In the 90s, 70s, 80s, predominantly a Catholic nationalist community, and it was easy access for Loyalists from either Ballinafie, Donegal Pass, Donegal Road, to come in, carry the tax and escape.
Along with that, you had these orange marches which passed the area, and quite provocative as a matter of fact, and we all remember after the Bookmakers Massacre the images of the crowds at the Orange Parade waving their hands, giving five fingers about the massacre. Then the Ormeau Road, after the peace process, we had the campaign to stop the orange marches coming down the Ormeau Road, and I remember it well myself. I was over in the Lower Ormeau during that period. I mean, how did that feel after your father's death, Billy, seeing those marches coming down and being taunted like that?
We always knew that the first orange march down by the bookies was going to be controversial. I didn't realise how bad it was going to be. But I didn't realise it was going to be like that, but it was. But as you say, it was the start of the beginning of them, the end of them, because we got the car, as the community got the car and said, listen, this is enough, this. Like we grew up with where you were completely blocked in. You couldn't go out for anything, you couldn't do none, you had to wait till it passed and then they came back. But the first one was the hardest to take off out of them all. I
mean, when you think about it, you had to suffer to what happened yourselves. You were both badly affected by what happened. Been hemmed in your homes. You've been taunted by the people who support these loyalist paramilitary groups, and in fact some loyalist paramilitaries themselves, walking past in the bookmakers and taunting the community. But not only that, when you protested against these taunts in this vicious campaign, the RUC were battening the people off the streets into the side streets for trying to peacefully protest at what was happening. I mean, Mark, tell me about that.
I think really what happened then after the orange woman danced outside the bookmakers were "Shy Sean, we have been 5-0 and dancing." The community got together and said, look, enough's enough. We're not going to tolerate this any longer. And LOCC, the Lower Ormeau Road Concerned Community, come into being. And it was against orange marches on the Ormeau Road. And it took a long time for that to happen, that orange marches would be stopped from coming down the Ormeau Road. But it wasn't easy. And as you say earlier, people were beat off the Ormeau Road by the RUC. People were hemmed in the streets. People were taunted by the Orange Order at every occasion, and I think, as I say, people have had enough of it and want to put an end to it, and thankfully that is the case today, that an orange march doesn't come down the Ormeau Road.
Yeah, I think the Ormeau Road at the time became the microcosm for the rest of the north and led the charge from other, Springfield Road, you'd Dunloy and other marches after that. Garvaki also was a big one. And when we reflect on that, it's 32 years later. Last Saturday, when I was filming the Loyalists and the far-right protests at Belfast City Hall, just a matter of hours later, I couldn't believe the scenes. I have to be honest, I envisaged it when I seen a couple of hundred Loyalists and far-right marching up Botanic towards Queen's University. I knew that there was a possibility of seeing those images 32 years later. And I'd contacted Jared Rice to ask, was the community prepared for the eventuality of these people entering the Lower Ormeau Road? And in fact they did. So 32 years later we're seeing these images that I thought I'd never seen, I'd never see again, sorry. And Billy, I'd seen yourself once we'd pushed the crowd back. How did you hear about this?
I was actually just passing with Jared Rice. You were just off the phone with him. I walked up on my 12-year-old daughter, and what I seen, I didn't think I'd ever see again. Hundreds of people marching. At the time, tricolour and Union Jack, and face covered up and shouting abuse at the local residents, and then
basically mobs.
Oh, it was terrible. Like I could see my wee girl was holding tight on me, and one of the first things I noticed that there wasn't many policemen. I knew myself, the experience I have on the Ormeau Road, it could escalate. And just with what I heard, like the cheering the 5-0 and the waving of the hands and all, and the abuse they were giving people, and it wasn't just me who was being hurt. Peter McGee's nieces was there, Mark's grandchildren were there. As you said, I didn't know at the time about downtown and all the antics about that there, and then going up to Botanic and Rackham Botanic, and then doing you coming back down on the Ormeau Road. I didn't even know what had happened. So I thought at myself they'd marched on the Ormeau Road. They came down illegally, which they did. But to stand there and to take what they done to our community, like nobody in our community didn't retaliate. They could have easy got out of hand. You were there, you were right at the front, Dirty Hargy, Jared Race, like all our local councillors. But to stand there and watch what they did to our community, like gloating on the murders of people in Sean Graham's, was very, very hurtful.
I mean, only feet away from Sean Graham's, there was at least 3 that were making the 5 gestures about the Sean Graham's Bookmakers Massacre. But there was another guy, if you can remember, with a cap.
Oh yeah, he was letting on to shoot the crowd, and the other one was doing that with his throat. So their mask had slipped down.
Yeah.
What they were really about, like.
Yeah, there was a conscious decision to come down and do that. Mark, back to yourself. I would like the audience to know, we're going to talk about the collusion and the aftermath of what we have found out, which is extraordinary. I'm involved in a lot of the cases in the sense where I'm in contact with, RFJ, Relatives for Justice, the Pat Finucane Centre. I mean, the Philemon Quiet Graves that we investigated, the Glenanne gang. But the extent of systemic collusion in the Sean Graham's Bookmakers Massacre blew me away. Even after everything that I had known about the Glenanne gang and others, can you give the audience a sense of that?
Well, really for us, as a group of families who had been impacted by the attack on Sean Graham's Bookmakers, believe it or not, it was about a week after the killings took place were the first signs of a cover-up. And what normally would happen for maybe some of the older viewers watching this is that on a week following any killings or any attack or any murders, there was a reconstruction carried out at the same time and all this sort of stuff. And then it would have been on what would have been termed Police 6 that evening. And a journalist asked the inspector at the time, Donegal Pass, about the history and the ballistics of the weapons. And normally that information would be given to journalists at the time, that the weapon had been used previously in a shooting or whatever it was. And he refused to answer any questions about the history or the ballistics of those weapons. And for us, maybe not a week after it, but looking back at it, that's when the cover-up seemed to start. But as, say, weeks and months passed, the initial thing around collusion was it the UDR. The
UDR being, at the time, was the biggest regiment in the British Army, just for the audience.
And they were locally recruited, and 99.9% of them were probably from a Unionist Loyalist background. So they had a vehicle checkpoint around 50 yards from Sean Graham's Bookmakers in University Avenue, and about 10-15 minutes before the attack took place, that UDR Jeep left the scene. There was also 2 RUC vehicle checkpoints. One was around 200 yards away at Ulster Television, and the other one was on the Ormeau Bridge. The one on the Ormeau Bridge was lifted, and the checkpoint at UTV remained during the attack.
That's at both sides of the bookmakers?
So that's it boxed in from both sides, and obviously the escape route that the killers took is where the UDR checkpoint had been. So for families then, they started to question the collusion aspect of the attack. And then the families for the next 30 years went on a campaign to try and find out the truth about how their loved ones were murdered and who was responsible for the murders. And it was very, very slow for families at that stage. Nothing happened for years. And then really it was during, it might have been Stephen's report, that it came out that one of the weapons that was used in the attack had been taken from Malone UDR base by Ken Barrett, who was sent in to there by his RUC handler, who was known as RO6 in the Ombudsman's report.
Ken Barrett was involved in the killing of Pat Finucane?
That's correct.
The Belfast solicitor?
Yes. So then we were then told that the Ken Barrett had handed the gun to Billy Stobie, who was also an RUC agent. Billy Stobie then handed it to his RUC handlers, who claimed that they deactivated this weapon and returned it back to the Loyalists, which we found to be untrue. It was never deactivated. But the families were never ever told this. Families had to fight tooth and nail to find this out. And then we were told then that the weapon used at the time was not an AK-47, as everybody had believed. It was a VZ-58. And what happened then was we were told that the VZ-58 was part of a shipment brought in from South Africa with the full knowledge of British military intelligence, and was divided between three Loyalist groups: the Ulster Resistance, the UVF and UDA. Both weapons that were used in the attack on Sean Graham's, one was obviously allowed to come into this state by the British state, and the other one was in possession of the RUC at some stage and handed back to the UDA. So information was coming in dribs and drabs to the families, and the information we received about the weapons obviously came out of like Stevens reports and other reports, and then we had a HET report, and there was a number of questions that the families posed to the HET, even though they never contacted the majority of the families. So some of the questions were obviously around the weapons and their history, and we were told that the VZ-58 had been disposed of, and just then we were saying that here's a weapon that's been involved in multiple murders where no one has been convicted for the murders, yet the weapon has been disposed of, which was a concern to the families. And we then obviously had taken the case at that stage to the police ombudsman, and it was through the police ombudsman that they had uncovered that the VZ-58 in fact wasn't disposed of, that it was on display in the Imperial War Museum in England in some macabre display of conflict.
That's the Imperial War Museum, just for the audience's sake, is next door to Downing Street.
In London, yeah.
Yeah, that's extraordinary.
Yeah, and so we had been told that at a police ombudsman's meeting, and we came out and we literally couldn't believe what we just heard, that we had been told for years, the family had been told for years, that this murder weapon had been disposed of, and it was in fact on display in the Imperial War Museum. Families couldn't believe it, and we then had to go back, because there was only a number of us meeting with the ombudsman, we had then to go back and tell our families what we had just heard. And the shock, I mean, in the families, it was unbelievable. They couldn't believe what they'd just heard. So again, do you mean families were being delayed and denied information every step of the way in terms of their quest to get truth and justice for their families, and that continued right up until we received an ombudsman's report. We were told an ombudsman's report would be ready in 2015, 2016, 2018, 2020. And when we were about to get a report, we were then told that the PSNI had uncovered thousands of pages of information that hadn't been given to the police ombudsman. And that had happened through a conversation with Niall Murphy and the ombudsman, where he had just met by chance, and says, have you seen X, Y, and Z? And he says, I'll have to go back and check. And when he went and checked, they hadn't received the information that Niall had been talking about. And it turned out that as part of the disclosure that Niall had received in the civil case, there was thousands of pages that the police ombudsman had not received. So the police ombudsman was trying to carry out an investigation, effectively with one hand tied behind his back, to get the truth about how our loved ones were murdered. So this was happening at every stage in the process where families were being denied information, and information was being delayed to the families. So we received then the police ombudsman's report in late January 2022, about a week before the 30th anniversary of the attack on Sean Graham Bookmakers. And some of the stuff that we had read in that report is still unbelievable to this day. One of the most startling things in it for us was that 8 of the people involved were agents for the RUC, or the British Military Intelligence, and had been involved in 27 murders in South Belfast. Given the fact that the police ombudsman was only looking at 11 murders carried out in South Belfast, including the murder of Teresa Clinton and Martin Moran, Harry Conlon, there was 20 other families in South Belfast who never got a report and probably never will get a report. So if 7 or 8 agents involved in those 11 killings were involved in 27 murders that were investigated, how many murders were they involved in that haven't been investigated yet? So there's a number of questions that need answered around those agents who were involved in those killings. And today, or the date, sorry, none of them have been held to account.
I remember that day, I was over in the community centre with yourselves when you received that report, and reading through some of that stuff was just unbelievable.
As you said in the beginning of the show, the collusion in Sean Graham's is maim. It's like what we have found out over the years. Like, we found out within a half an hour they knew where the gunmen had put the guns. Nobody went to arrest them. We found out about the getaway cars. One of the getaway drivers was driving it for 2 or 3 days while he was on the drink.
That was Raymond Elder, isn't it?
It was.
Isn't that right? He was later killed by the IRA, him and Joe Brady.
He was arrested for buying one of the getaway cars, and the case again was dropped against him. But it was horrifying, the collusion that we found out over the years, because we found out about Mickey Gilbride and Teresa Clinton and Laurie Brannan. We found out that they were all killed with the same UDA death squad. They were, for at least 6 years, they had absolutely terrified our community. And as we know now, that they were all agents of the state, getting paid to kill innocent people and from our community. But what we found out together, like Mark's a victim, my ex-father was murdered. It was horrifying, the collusion in Sean Graham's. But that was 90% of the people who murdered during the conflict. The MI5 and Spicer branch had agents everywhere. As Mark says, we only know of 8 agents and 27 murders in South Belfast. But how many was there? I mean, that's the question we still need to keep pushing. We haven't been able to act on our Achilles report because the retired police officers have brought us to court. It was 2 weeks after. Yeah. So we hadn't even got a chance to document it, to get it. And then we had to go back to court again to, we're actually going to court to defend the Achilles report, so we are. Mark's brother-in-law, Patrick, he was one of the ones who took a case up against him, and God love him, he's passed away. So many people connected with Sean Graham's haven't seen justice, haven't seen the truth being told. We've got the Achilles report. The Achilles report is the tip of the iceberg. And
effectively, looking at the Achilles report, you effectively found out who the 2 gunmen were. Is that correct?
Well,
without compromising on the campaign?
It wouldn't take a smart man to put the A, B and C together. Once you go in, they put the names to the A and put the name to B and put a name to C. It's easily done. But as again, for legal reasons, you can't say none. We need to get these people in court. We need the case reopened again. And then another one is this Legacy Act has come in on top of us, where
destroyed all the chances of.
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully not. Hopefully Labour will give us a chance to get the truth the way we want.
Things you said there, Sean, about the police ombudsman's report, giving us an idea who the gunmen were and the getaway drivers were, and what we're hearing in recent days is that these far-right protesters from the Kulak Says No campaign were drinking with the very same people who murdered our loved ones.
It was bad enough last Saturday to see those far-right hooligans, that's what I would call them, to be standing beside sectarian bigots like that. And to then, as you say, be drinking in a Loyalist bar with people.
We committed one of the biggest, well, personally, me and Mark won't speak, but everyone who lost his life during a conflict, it's a tragedy. But Sean Graham's, as you said, was a 15-year-old child. Mark's brother-in-law, Mark, my father, all the ones. It was shooting facing a barrel. It was a wee small room. It was one of the ones we talk about 32 years later, and they're sitting drinking, celebrating them. What they were talking about, your man goes, you can't sleep at night. Like, they don't even know their own history about the Dublin and Monaghan bombing, where the Loyalists went down and killed all them people. But then they come up to our streets in Belfast to fly our flag along with Emmons. And that parade on Saturday, there was other killers in the crowd from the Loyalist community. They just need to go and educate themselves. And another thing, that they just need to stay down there too. We have enough problems up there without demons coming in here and stoking the fire.
Of course. Well, one thing I can say, there wasn't too many of them, and we'll hope that we'll see the end of it. We'll hope we don't see the legs of it again. But on that, Billy, Mark, I want to thank you for coming in. I know it's very, very difficult to talk about, even 32 years on, but you always have the support of the community, and it's always good to see you both.
Thank you.
All right, Billy.
Thanks very much.
And that does it for another week. We'd love for you to join the conversation by sharing the link to today's programme to help us grow our audience across all our social media platforms. I'd like to thank our special guests, Mark and Billy. In the meantime, the conversation will be back next week with more investigations and analysis. I'm Sean Murray. Bye for now.